Yeah,
right, are you all with me this time? Apologies.
Yes, I can hear you okay.
Excellent. That's broken the ice, if nothing else. You've had 5 minutes of me and the wife struggling with the laptop. So.
Oh, no, well done. Thank you for sorting it out. Thank you.
No worries. Like I say, one of those you think you should tick the little box when actually you meant to leave the little box alone. So anyway, back to where we started. Some of you, definitely 2 of you, will know me as the foreman of North Level Drainage Board. If any of you guys follow North Level on Twitter, chances are you've seen my tweets, because 99% of them are my work. And that's really where this story starts, because the North Level were approached by Daniel, who's here, to assist the committee in looking for one of the missing buffaloes of 1947. Daniel approached our CEO at an event at, I believe, is at Crowland Methodist Chapel, where Daniel was given a talk, and asked if we'd be willing to help out with a dig and provide some manpower and a machine. And we agreed. And in all honesty, I don't think we ever thought it was going to come to anything. But Daniel's a very forceful, if that's the right word, and I mean that in the nicest way. Sorry, what do you want me to press? Oh, yes. Hold on. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, Daniel's quite a driven guy, and what we thought would never amount to anything certainly did amount into quite a project. But we'll run through the basics of what the committee was for, and once again, Daniel's here, so he'll probably correct me on a lot of this, but it's my belief that the association was formed to try and commemorate the 75th anniversary of the 1947 floods, which were, quite frankly, one of the biggest events, not only in Fenland history, well, certainly in Crowland's history, but it was a national disaster. I think there's no getting away from that. And in the post-war years, it couldn't have happened at a more worse a time. Daniel set about collecting photographs, oral history, because those who remember it are getting fewer and fewer in number. And one of the main things was this local myth, folklore, urban myth of the tanks being buried in the bank, in the flood defence at Crowland. I grew up around Crowland, very much like Daniel, and I'd heard the story. My nan told me the story. I told her she's talking a lot of rubbish, and she gave me a clip round the ear. But as a young chap, there's fishing lakes down there now, and I set off and to hunt for these tanks myself as a 12, 13-year-old. And on approaching the flood defence bank, there, poking out of the top, is metal. And I thought, that's it. Well, no, it wasn't. That's the sheet piling. But so no, I dismissed it and went, no, rubbish. They're not in there. If they are, they wouldn't have shoved sheet piles through the top of them, that's for sure. Because anyone who's had any experience of putting sheet piles in will tell you anything in the way is bad news. So as far as I was concerned, that's where the story ended. They must have been taken away in 1947, and all that remained were the pictures that the sort of pictures that Daniel had been collecting. Now, this is the breach site today. Now, don't quite believe what you see on the map. Where that says River Welland, that's actually the new river. The River Welland is off to the left-hand side, but what you can see there, to the left is the high wash, and to the right of that horseshoe shape in the bank where the breach took place are the remains of the scour hole and the borrow pit from which the bank was formed, where the material was taken. In fact, the pits either side of that are where the soil was excavated from. And this is where our story unfolds. To tell it fully, I'm going to have to take you back in time. I'm going to take you back 75 years to the winter of 1947. It was certainly the worst winter that had been experienced in over a century. As you can see here, lows of -20 degrees Celsius were recorded at Writtle in Essex. There were massive accumulations of snow right across the country. Locally in the Fens, there was around 2 feet, but the drifting was so bad. We've had reports that people were able to climb out of their upstairs windows and walk from their upstairs down the snowdrift to ground level. As you could be aware, this couldn't have come at a worse time for Britain as a whole. Food was still rationed, energy was short, and this was, you know, a very testing time. These are some pictures from the time. I believe the one on the right is Margate in Kent, so this gives you a bit of an indication of how cold it was when the sea itself, in a county traditionally that doesn't see a lot of snow, has frozen over. Obviously trains being dug out, and the car itself, that may be a small old car, but that's, you know, massive accumulations of snow, which was right across the country. On March the 10th, however, things started to make a change. Now, a change from my perspective in the drainage board sense is bad news. Anyone who's ever worked with flood defence or on the drainage board will tell you that snow is just money in the bank as far as water is concerned. It sits there ready and waiting. The picture we've got is the morning of, obviously, Monday the 10th, when a warm front moved in. Ironically, this brought much heavier snow to the north of England, but to the Fens, it brought warmer temperatures and a lot of rain. This rain fell on frozen ground and frozen drains, in effect, so there was no lag time between peak rainfall and peak discharge, and the water entered the drainage system at alarming speed and put the North Level and its pumping stations under a massive amount of stress early on in the crisis. North Level's response was, as you would expect, the North Level had been well prepared for this. They'd seen it coming. Drain levels had been kept low, but at a steady pace, as to keep the ice sheets intact, and the intake to the pumping stations had been kept clear. The ice had been broken up so as to allow water to flow freely into the pump. The Clouds Cross sluice at Parson Grove, for those of you who are familiar with it, was closed to help protect the Tid pumping station, which is the picture there on your right. And a sandbag wall was built across the front of the station, where you can see the grills at the water's edge. That's roughly where that sandbag wall would have been built from one side to the other to help negate the high water coming down. And as you can see from the text, the very next day, the water was 4.5 inches above the concrete walkway in front of the station. The Dogner Doublet that pumps into the River Nene near Whittlesea and the Cross Guns near Thorney Toll suffered similar fates. Safe to say we were pumping flat out to rid ourselves of the water that came in. And then things got progressively worse. And on the 15th of March, a low pressure system moved in from the Atlantic, bringing with it gale force winds. In fact, the report at the time says speeds of 90 knots, which to 100 miles an hour, a lot of money. Obviously, because of the rainfall and the quick discharge, the Crowland and Cubic washes were already full to capacity and still covered with a layer of ice. The ice was, with the wind, dashed against the banks in quite a violent manner, which causes a great deal of destruction. The top picture you can see there is during the event, and you can see the overtopping water has basically chiseled away the rear side of the bank, and that's quite a common feature. We, as a drainage board now, we still do work for the Environment Agency to repair such damage on the River Nene that happens on the Cradge Bank. Little bit of a disclaimer: the bottom picture is not 1947; that's Easter '98, but it gives an indication of what you would have seen on the Crowland washes at the time. At 12:15 a.m. on Friday the 21st, disaster struck. 1.25 miles north of Crowland, the bank breached. Now, I believe I'm right in saying at the time it was said that the bank moved out in a solid lump, near enough. The pressure just pushed it out, and a 55-metre wide breach was formed. by our calculations, we estimate around 20 million cubic metres of water began flooding into the North Level, which unfortunately for the North Level, from the bank at Crowland, the whole catchment at that period was angled or flowed downhill towards Tid. So we had 20 million metres of water entering a drainage system whose main pumping station was 18 to 19 miles away. You can understand that's there a little bit of a problem for a drainage board. Also, at the time, there was a rather vicious rumour that the breach was caused by how do I put it, sabotage from farmers on the opposite side of the river on Deeping Fen. This has never, it's been spoken about many times, but it has never been proven, and I doubt there'd be that evil. The picture at the bottom is a team of the guys who were working on the bank. Now, according to the North Level sources on our computer system at work, the chap on the far left is Walter Lyon. Now, he's the one who apparently ran from the breach, ran the 1.25 miles into Crowland to raise the alarm. Now, whilst carrying out the Buffalo project, a farmer by the name of Woodruff said his grandfather was rather peeved by this because it was the two of them who discovered the breach whilst patrolling the bank, both of them who ran back to Crowland, but only Walter Lyon who got his name in the newspaper. And I don't think they spoke again after that. But yeah, that's a little side story there. The North Level obviously had to defend itself, and we were fortunate the system has several ancient flood defences that run through it, the South Owe Bank, along with the main March to Spalding railway line. This did help contain the floodwater, but this came at the expense of those around Crowland. Culverts were blocked, sluice gates were closed, and the water was allowed to build up within the Crowland area. Had it been allowed to pass through the rest of the catchment, it would have inundated the Tid pumping station and all would have been, to excuse the pun, sunk. The pictures are French Drove pumping station. Obviously, top picture is 1947 and the bottom picture is current day. Just to give you put you in the picture, the bottom picture, the left-hand side of that would have been where the floodwaters were overtopping the bank to the left and filling up what is in the bottom of that picture, the New South Owe, which flows directly to Clouds Cross at Parson Drove and then on to Tid. So you can see why it was so imperative that was protected. But as you can see there, the pumping station was inundated with water and no doubt rendered useless at that point. As I said before, the defence of the North Level came at the expense of the farmers of Crowland and Postland and Newborough Fen. This didn't go unnoticed, and there were several attempts at sabotage, for want of a better word. And I remember being told by my grandfather, who farmed at Dalesdale, where there was a dam put in to hold the water, that a farmer from upstream who was getting flooded out decided he didn't want the dam in there and turned up to site with a hand grenade, obviously of World War II vintage, probably from his time in the Home Guard, and threatened to blow the dam sky high. Obviously, that's not the done thing. There are already a lot of military personnel on site because the dam was being illuminated by a searchlight team, and I think between the military personnel on site and the local policeman, they removed the Mills bomb from his possession, and he was sent on his way with a word of caution. But there were numerous attempts at sabotage, even in the North Level official history of it, and a lot of these dams had to be patrolled day and night to prevent their interference with. Ooh, excuse me, wrong button. This map's a rather good one. I'll just explain it for you, but it does give a very good indication of what occurred. Obviously, the purpley blue area to the northwest of Crowland is the Crowland Wash. Obviously, that did extend further north into Cubbit, so you've got the Crowland and Cubbit washes are one entirety. That was where the floodwater was originally held. The breach happened 1.25 miles north of Crowland, and I think you can see the horseshoe shape in the bank there, just to the left of Falls Farm. And the lighter blue area is the flooded area. That is as far as the water progressed. It was held in check on its northeastern edge by the Spalding to March Railway, and then the water was held in check by the old South O Bank, and then the high ground to the Cat's Water to the south, all the way to the A47, where once again it's held in by the railway line. The north-south divide just to the side of Newborough, I believe, was a sandbag wall built along the Crowland Peterborough Road as well to keep the water off. There is just north of Thorney, where you can see Morris Fen. There's a slightly lighter blue area there, if you can see it. That area was actually flooded from the inundation from French Drove, where you all the pictures of the pumping station. That is where that overtopped and flooded into Morris Fen. As you see, that's a substantial area water. These are some of the aerial shots. This one was taken from directly above Crowland, just to show the extent of the flooding. I'll just explain what you're looking at there, so you've got a better idea. But that's Crowland looking towards Neen Terrace, and the drier patch in the middle would be what is now Cat's Water area, for those who know it, and then Thorney off in the distance. I'll go off on a slight tangent because I do like my Fenland history, which I'm sure you do too. In the centre of, slightly after the centre of the picture, a strip of dry ground following the roadside. That is what we believe, or certainly what I believe, to be probably one of the most important parts of Crowland's history and what brought Crowland a lot of its wealth. That's the remains of the canal that linked the River Neen catchment and the Welland catchment, on which, in the times of the Abbey, barges would have passed through, in which the Abbey put a toll on, and from there came a great deal of the Abbey's wealth. It ran from Neen Terrace. Obviously, that's where the Neen part comes from, which is also a contentious point, and I'm sure Michael will agree with me that Neen Terrace has only been called Neen Terrace in recent times. It was in not too distant past known as the Engine, which referred to the several steam and wind pumps that were there for the drainage of the Fens. But just gone off on a little tangent there. But yeah, certainly that strip there you can see heading in a northerly direction is what I believe to be the upcast from the canal digging days of the monastery. This one, from my best efforts, I believe, is looking north towards Crowland from the Newborough direction, but also gives a very good indication of the sheer volumes of water that were that poured onto the Fens, because it was, in effect, you couldn't have had a more worst case scenario. The washes themselves are higher than surrounding land and are, in effect, a huge reservoir. Once that breached, it was instantaneous flooding. It's not like tidal or river flooding where it's fed by the river. This was a huge volume of water just waiting to be released, and once it went, there was certainly no stopping it, or not in the short time anyway. The repair of the breach started was commenced by the River Neen Catchment Board. The North Level was already fully engaged in the operation of pumping, so the River Neen Catchment Board took over the control of the attempted sealing of the breach. The picture that's shown is of the narrow gauge railway that was put into place and brought down soil and aggregates from Crowland along the top of the bank for 1.25 miles, and from there they started to form a coffer dam, in effect, that went in a horseshoe shape, which they had to do because of the scour hole created, and to try and seal off the breach. This was a very laborious, slow process, as you can imagine, and I would imagine the difficulty in getting aggregates and soil into Crowland at the time was also a deciding factor in the decision to call for military assistance. I believe officially the only way to get soil and aggregates in was along the tops of the riverbanks to Crowland from all directions, including Peakirk, which you could imagine in 1947 was not an easy task. So the army came to the rescue. They'd already been employed at Erith with the breach in the ooze washes, and the army was already employed in assisting in the flood relief and rescue. So it wasn't much of a step for them to bring in and call in some amphibious vehicles. The ones used at Erith were Neptunes. I think they'd exhausted their supply of those, and Northern Command, as it was at that time, brought in LVT-4 Buffaloes, and they were American built, left over from World War II. We're struggling to find where they come from. Well, we know where they came from, but certainly in the locality, we believe they were possibly stored at Cambridge and then some at York as well, and they were brought in by train and by lorry to help seal the breach. They were taken through the middle of Crowland and driven along the top of the bank to the site of the breach, so 1.25 miles up the top of the bank. Convoy of a dozen LVT Buffaloes would have been quite a sight indeed. The gap itself wasn't just plugged by the Buffaloes. As you can probably see from the picture, the Buffaloes are kind of wedge shaped, so it leaves a fairly hefty gap between front and back. They were used merely as the foundation, and over the side of the Buffaloes there was a mixture of Summerfeld netting, which I'll expand on in a second. Yes, Summerfeld netting, sandbags, and soil. And this wall was built down the washwood side of the Buffaloes. I'll go off on a little tangent about the Summerfeld netting, because what was Nazi Germany's loss was our gain, because it's often anglicised to Summerfield netting, but it's actually Summerfeld. And the chap who designed it was a German Jew who was escaped Nazi Germany, came to live in Cambridge, and he was a very good engineer, and part of his wartime effort, he designed Summerfeld netting, which was a temporary runway surface of wire mesh with pierced steel rods. And it was used extensively throughout Normandy and France to make temporary runways for aircraft. And obviously there was plenty surplus after the war, and it provided an excellent basis for our sandbag and soil wall. If I haven't already said it, yeah, the work was completed, as it says on the text, on early on Saturday, March the 29th. And unfortunately, it didn't last. During the early part of April, there was further rainfall in the catchment. That, along with the fact that they'd started pumping water back into the wash, meant that the Buffaloes were at one point holding a head of 7 feet of water. And on Friday, the 11th of April, the repair gave way. And I have read, I couldn't source it at the time today, but I have read a rather graphic report that the breach started off as a mere trickle. I think it was around 20 yards away from the wall of Buffaloes on the dry side. One of the workmen spotted a small, what looked to be a small spring popping up out of the ground. And as the hours passed, it became a torrent. And what was happening was, they believe at the time, the water had found a geological fault. It was possibly a peat layer beneath the Buffaloes, way below the ground level, and the water had started to percolate through this. And as it passed, obviously it eroded more and more, and a chasm opened up beneath the Buffaloes, into which we believe five Buffaloes fell into, washed them away, and several were sunk and lost for some time. And once again, that leads us to where our story's going, but I think you already know that. Yeah, there we go. You can see here, several of the Buffaloes were washed away. To give you a little bit of an orientation, because obviously I know these pictures very well. What you're looking at there is back towards Crowland. The washes are on the right hand side with your wall of buffaloes, and the breach is to the left with one slightly floating buffalo in the water. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that Buffalo 47, which is in the committee's possession, is somewhere left out of shot, rather deep under the water. While we're on this picture as well, if you look just above the submerged buffalo, you'll see the line of willows, which were planted to protect the bank from the ice and the water and the like, which was sort of fairly standard practice in those days, which is ironically enough frowned upon these days, but the Environment Agency don't stand for trees in the bank. But you'll see in that line of willows, there is a very light line that is the water erosion and the ice damage to the willow trees, where it's stripped the bark back to the bare white willow wood. So that gives an indication of the depth of water that was there prior to the breach. The second breach repair obviously was going to require much more effort. The Royal Engineers were brought in, and various other regiments, but the Royal Engineers took over the running of it. And the image at the bottom there is actually taken from the Royal Engineers Journal. I believe it's volume 61. Rather interestingly, the Royal Engineers produce a yearly journal, or certainly did, logging all their engineering achievements during the previous year. And obviously this was one of their great achievements of 1947. So if anyone gets a chance to get a copy of Royal Engineers Journal, then you will find a nice description of not only their works at the Welland, but also their works at Erith. The problem lied in the fact that they were going to have to reroute the New River, because the new Buffalo Wall was going to go beyond the New River. So it became a massive operation. You can see from the pictures, all the track marks, this is where the buffaloes were bringing in sandbags, supplies, timber, more sheep piles and the like. And you can tell it was a rather muddy job. But yeah, the image below is a rather sketchy drawing, but gives a good idea of the what went on there. But yes, the second wall was built successfully, and the New River was dammed off and rerouted as well afterwards. So yeah, there's a great deal of engineering prowess went into that. The final breach repair was carried out in, I believe it was August of 1947. They obviously did not hang about. They wanted it done before the next winter season. Now, at the start of the talk, I reminisced about going down to the washes as a young teenager and looking for these buffaloes, and found nothing more than sheep piles. Well, these are the sheep piles you can see in the picture. They stretch around in a horseshoe shape that is now buried under the earth embankments. And once again, little pointer that there's a crawler or bulldozer in the middle of that picture. There's somewhere underneath that bulldozer is where Buffalo 47 was lying entombed in clay. They'd obviously backfilled the area to carry out the works, and had neglected to recover the buffalo. A few more interesting parts. You can see there's some RB10 drag lines in the background. We believe Crowland Cranes now has one of those very drag lines in its yard, fully restored and looking quite good. And we're hoping that will one day join Buffalo 47 in its museum if it ever comes to fruition. The tower on the right hand side is I believe I'm right in saying, a steam piler. This is the piling hammer which drove the sheep piles in. And earlier this year, whilst digging a test hole, we actually found one of the rails, or one of the sleepers, one of the sleepers that the rails ran on, because this ran on a railway track. It's fairly large, and a necessity for it to run a railway track around the edge of the site. And we managed to dig one of those up, and that will, I think that's in Daniel's collection right now. The cost of a North Level, according to the official North Level history book, was £268,728. So £250,000 in 1947 was certainly not to be sniffed at. I think I'm right in saying the work was carried out by the King's Lynn Construction and Dredging Company. they tendered for the work and came in at the most reasonable price, I would imagine. And yeah, they carried out the work, and I believe it was completed by August 1947. Now we'll hop back to the present day, and obviously the Daniel Abbott's research led him to believe there were still buffaloes at the site. At this point, I thought he was barking mad, and yeah, there's no buffaloes down there. But Daniel, with the help of with some others, got in several teams, or various teams and organisations carried out scans of the site. Daniel knows them more in depth than I did, because I wasn't part of the project in those days. But one of the first teams to actually come out were RAF Bomb Disposal. I'm not quite sure how he wrangled it, but they came out and did a scan of the ground with their equipment and confirmed that there was something large and metallic below ground level. The only problem was, because it was the MOD, they were not allowed to share the data with us, possibly because they don't want the Russians knowing how good their ground penetrating radar is. But yeah, they could only verbally confirm it and took away all the data with them. But with this sort of nugget of information and this shaft of light, shall we say, it was decided to pay for I think if anyone who used to watch the Time Team on TV on Channel 4 would know as geophys. And this image on the left is what was produced, with the colours going from white to red of the highest magnetism, obviously through to sort of green and blue for low magnetism. What you can see there, certainly 1, 2, and 3 were very, very interesting, shall we say, and these formed the basis of the idea of the dig. In fact, the first I saw these on my desk at the North Level office, and it was at this point my view of the project started to change and went, maybe Daniel's not as nuts as I first thought. And yes, so that's kind of where we went from there, really. In the winter of 2021, the association has announced that it intended to carry out the dig. Daniel, though, hadn't informed us of this, and at the time, my general opinion was not a chance. We'd come out of the worst winter the worst rain event since Easter '98. The Christmas of 2020 and 2021 had been a very testing one for North Level, and we were at capacity soil moisture deficit. The ground was fully saturated, and in late January, when I read that the Buffalo Association planned to dig in March, I thought, you're having a laugh. And but as fate would have it, the springtime was favourable, and we went from near enough flood conditions to drought conditions in the space of a couple of months. The North Level still wasn't in a great position to help out. Obviously, we're a public body in effect, and we were doing this as a favour. And this is where, believe it or not, HS2 came into the equation, because we were flat out with repairing the damage from the floods or from the rain event of Christmas 2020, and we were piling and stone pitching. When the new tax year rolled around, we could not source aggregate for love nor money, and it was because HS2, whose new money had come in from the government, was stockpiling aggregates. So our stone pitching job on the New South O drain at French Drove ground to a halt simply because we couldn't get the material. So I found the digger driver another job to do on a small machine, and the Volvo 250, you can see in the picture here, was parked up at Malice Farm Wind Farm, just off of French Drove, for those who are familiar with the area. And there it sat for a few days whilst planning the works for this 13-ton machine, which I'd now got to find work for. Paul Sharman, the CEO of North Level, came down and said, I've had Daniel Abbott on the phone, and he wants to know if we can dig this buffalo up. And it was a bit of a light bulb moment. And I said, yes, but I said, we're doing it now. I said, because I can't get aggregate for a week. I I'll admit this, and I'd say it to Daniel's face, I thought we'd be there 2 days, find nothing and come back. But I thought, keeps my machine busy for 2 days, I'm happy with that. And it keep Daniel happy as well, because we'll have a little dig. So on the 23rd of April, we picked up the machine from Rydecroft Wind Farm and took it to Clute Drove. Getting into the site was difficult from the start. We couldn't come in from the north because the Postland pumping station was too narrow to get the digger through. Coming in from the south, from Crowland, I viewed to be too tight as well. So we unloaded off of Clute Drove, and Beacons, the farmers at Crowland, were very generous in allowing us to track our machine over their fresh drilling. As it turned out, it was very dry and didn't hurt it one piece. In fact, several months later, when we finished, you couldn't even see where we'd been, and we'd been in and out over the same field. It was decided to dig on the strongest anomaly, which on that previous geophys scan was number 1. That was the strongest, and we felt that'd be the best option first, and then go for number 2 afterwards. Day 1 was the 23rd of April 2021, so tomorrow is the birthday of our dig. We decided to go straight down. There was written reports that the buffaloes were 28 feet below ground level. This filled me with a great deal of worry, but I thought, no, it's yes, over exaggeration of the press. But we dug straight down on top of the anomaly. I believe we started at around 9 o'clock in the morning. We waited for the junior engineer to come out with the GPS, and he GPSed the location to make sure we were in the right spot. And as you can see from the picture on the left, we took a trench straight down. There's several feet of brown loamy soil, but then we broke into solid blue clay. Now this was, believe it or not, a good thing. Anyone who's hand dug blue clay will tell you it's terrible, but for excavation purposes, blue clay will stand up very well. You can trench it, it doesn't move, it doesn't crumble, and it doesn't pose too great a collapse risk. So when I saw that, it was good. However, you can see at the bottom of that there was water ingress, which didn't fill me with joy, but that, you know, we're a drainage board, we can deal with all that sort of thing. We made our first contact with something just after midday on the 23rd of April, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I told Daniel to go and get himself some dinner because it was gone dinner time. I said nothing's going to happen, and then secretly, you know, it's like you think, I bet as soon as he walks off, we're going to find something. And yes, lo and behold, and when I click this, hopefully the video should play. But lo and behold, we found something. Yeah, that video should have been longer, really. But that was me filming that, but I was keen to have a look at what we found. Safe to say, Daniel was halfway through a sandwich when he heard the sound of metal on metal. My digger driver heard it, I heard it, and Daniel, who was about 50 meters away, heard it and came running over with a half-eaten sandwich. What we found was a 30 caliber gun shield, and there it is, sat on the grass, fresh out. This caused us a great deal of joy. We knew we were onto something. I did have the little concern that maybe that was what the anomaly was, and that was all we were going to find, but obviously I didn't tell Daniel that at the time. The bottom picture there of a buffalo in action just actually shows you where the gun shield is. The shape on the rear of the buffalo with the gun pointing out the back, that is the gun shield in action, in effect. And I believe how it's orientated in that photograph, it's actually stood on its end. So a 30 caliber machine gun would have poked out the top of it as it stands, and this was an armor-plated gun shield for the crew of a buffalo. So yes, we'd found that. We were Daniel was ecstatic. I was filled with dread, however, because we were nearly at max depth with our digger, and Daniel, I was unaware of the orientation of these gun shields on buffaloes at the time. I hadn't seen the likes of that bottom picture, but Daniel told me that the gun shield was on top of the buffalo, and Daniel was very happy. And as I said, I was filled with dread, because if this is on top of the buffalo, we've got another 8 feet to go down, and we were nearly at maximum dig depth. So it was decided to widen the dig hole, because in effect we thought we'd found what we were looking for. We expanded it sideways. We all took a step back and let the digger driver get on with it. He knew where he was working, and yeah, we let him start bulking out. In the mid-afternoon, we had that sound of metal on metal again, and I jumped down into the hole. That's me there in the orange high-vis, and we uncovered what we thought was a metal tubular bar. This filled us with a little bit of a puzzle, because we wasn't aware of any tubular metal structures on a buffalo. They're kind of square. We were like, well, yeah, maybe it's another part of a gun shield, something else in the backfill. We weren't entirely sure, but this was at around 20 feet or 6 meters in depth. I obviously then hand dug around it. Daniel very quickly joined me in the hole, and what we uncovered was this, and this was the moment of greatest joy. What you're actually looking at there is the rear right-hand corner of the buffalo. The tubular steel was the top of the drop-down door, and the square section you can see below it is the catch that holds the door up, in effect, when it's in transport. And I'm sure Daniel will tell you, we actually managed to free that catch up there and then, and it still moved. It still moved freely. It was corrosion free. It was quite a moment. And with that also, we instantly knew the orientation of the buffalo. We could pace out on top of the ground. We knew where we needed to be digging. Everything was now prepped and ready to go. We got the space, we got the machine. This was obviously not as deep as the gun shield we found, and we were happy to progress at this point. The rest of the afternoon was spent bulking out the material above the buffalo. Like I said, Joe, our digger driver, who, well, I'll say it now, he's the unsung hero of the project. Joe doesn't do media or fame, or if you can call it fame, but he certainly doesn't do a lot of attention. But I think Daniel and Michael would agree that he was a great addition to our team. But yeah, he dug off, and this picture was close of play on the first day. And you can still see the rear corner, and the water-filled hole in the centre is the part we became affectionately known as skip, which is the hold area of the back of the buffalo. Now, day 2 was the 26th of April, and for those who are paying attention, you'll realise that that's several days later. Much to Daniel's annoyance, I wasn't paying my driver overtime to work all weekend on a voluntary project. So a rather disappointed Daniel was told on Friday night that we'd see him again Monday morning. He wasn't overly keen, but he hadn't got a lot of choice in it. And but we went back, and this was well, start of play, or midday on day 2, and the right-hand picture is how we ended the dig on day 2. The holes in the top there, the rectangular holes, are the storage bins in the buffalo, and we'd opened up the area in the back up to the front bulkhead where the engine was. The ranging rods, you can see, we put those in to mark out the extremities of the buffalo to give our digger driver a bit more of a chance and save him damaging it. One of the best parts of one of the best pieces of luck was that the digger bucket that he came with was about ½ an inch smaller than what we called the skip area of the inside of the buffalo. So as much as me and Daniel would tell everyone we hand dug out the buffalo, we did, but not all of it. Our skilled digger driver got the vast majority of it out. Day 3, as you can see, saw a massive amount of progress. And the centre picture, I remember I had to dig down the back of the back door, because I was familiar enough with buffaloes to know that if they'd got any markings on them, they'd be on the back. And I called Daniel over. I said, mate, I said, we found some markings on the back here, and he got the rag, and there on the back was 47, which ironically lost in 1947 and is 1947. And obviously, I think the left-hand picture was close of play on day 3. Obviously, like all things like this, the first 2 days, me and Daniel dug single-handedly. But once people got a whiff of there's something good going on, we got a few more volunteers to come down. In the right-hand picture is Darren Speechley, and I believe the chap on the right was Mike Goodliff. Mike was very keen to be involved. He's a farmer from Newborough, but his grandfather actually worked on the breach back in 1947. So he, after a full day of farming, used to come down most afternoons and give us a hand. So so we were very grateful for that. And the back of the silver-haired chap you can see there, that's Pete Izzett of Crowland Cranes, who once again another rather unsung hero of the group. He was a part driving force behind it and encouraged Daniel, and had promised one of his cranes to pull it out. Unfortunately, after the second day, he realised there was no way his crane was going to get this out, but he was instrumental in organising its recovery. Day 4, the 28th of April. As you can see, things progressed massively. I'd had sheet piles brought to the site a few days previously, and as you can see on the left hand and the right hand pictures, we shoved sheet piles in. The backfill material was contaminated with gravel, which obviously for anyone who had experience of digging big holes, gravel is good for digging, but not great for holding your trench sides up. As I was kind of responsible for the safety down there and the responsibility of the dig, I was very keen to get these piled, because the movement in the bank could have been catastrophic. So these held the gravel in place and would help capture any trench collapse and give anyone working down there a safe margin for doing so. The centre picture is quite a good one. I believe that's Daniel there posing at the back, but it does give you a good idea of the scale of the dig. I don't think I've put it on the slides, but by the end of the dig, we calculated we'd excavated 4,500 tonnes of clay to free the buffalo up. So yeah, it's a fairly substantial hole. This was the morning of the 29th of April, which was a Thursday. That's Mike and Darren Speechley. Me and Daniel offloaded the rubbish jobs onto those two. I don't think we're shy in saying. And they set about clearing out the inside of the cockpit. We were going to drag the buffalo out, it was decided, and we needed to lessen the weight. There are towing points on the buffalo, but we couldn't vouch for their stability, their structural soundness, and we needed to make it as light as possible. So these two chaps volunteered to climb into the cockpit and literally passed out tons and tons of clay, bucket by bucket, out of the top of the buffalo, and it was passed along and literally thrown over the sides. The bottom pitch there is quite a nifty panoramic shot, but what it also shows very well is Joe, our digger driver, digging the ramp. The excavations either side of the buffalo were fairly complete, so he tracked around and started to dig a ramp through which the buffalo would be dragged up later that day. Obviously, day 5 still, 29th of April in the afternoon. The recovery commenced. Pete Izzett was obviously, for those who aren't familiar with him, is the director and owner of Crowland Cranes, obviously crane company, but they also do a lot of crane repair and crane recovery. And because of this, he has quite a good relationship with some recovery firms. And Tiers, who are of Long Sutton, so they're a local Fenland company rather. He rang them up and asked them if they would be willing to do us a favour, basically, do us a freebie. He explained the situation, and they were very keen to be involved. They came down and had a look, and they said this was right up their street. They had the kit for the job, and as you can see from the pictures, there is 2 wrecker lorries The modern one, I'm not sure what that is, but the green one, the XMOD one, is a Foden wrecker. They're friends of mine who are in the Remy regiment. Apparently, they've quite the reputation. The gearbox of champions, I believe, is the tagline they go with. But these were brought to site. They were anchored at the top of the slope, and the cables and the winches were pulled down. You can see in the top right-hand picture there, Crowland cranes supplied all the towing and lifting gear. They also put a couple of load cells into the tow lines, so we could tell what sort of amount of weight we were pulling. The figure escapes me. I'm sure if Daniel was doing this, he'd remember. But I know for a fact on the right hand side, so as you look at the picture with the guys there with the towing straps, where Pete in the blue overalls is standing, we had a webbing strap around the rear sprocket. That took such strain it actually melted the nylon core. That's the sort of weight we were pulling.
Pulling 35 tons up.
Thank you, Daniel. I knew you wouldn't let me down.
And when it got to the top, it was when it leveled off, it was weighing about 25 tons.
Excellent. Just while you're talking, Daniel, I'm going to turn the light on because I didn't have one and it's damn dark in here now. Bear with me a second. Hopefully you can see me a little better now. Lights on, and I can see my notes as well. I was working in the dark there. Sorry. So yes, that was the afternoon. So I think I'm slightly biased in saying, but I think it was a monumental effort. In 5 days, we went from a grass field to 4.5, 5,000 tons of clay removed, and carefully around a rather fragile relic and towed it to the top. It's quite a monumental event. We had quite a crowd down there to the point where we had to arrange our fencing to corral the viewers in. And Daniel actually missed the moment it started to move because he was too busy chastising a press photographer who'd gone outside of the cordon, if I remember rightly, and I had to holler him back because he was going to miss the moment. What will happen now very quickly, I think it's just 2 or 3 minutes. Our junior engineer in the office, Ross Brown, made a time-lapse video of the recovery of the buffalo. It's like I say, just 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll play it just to give you an idea of what was happening. Yeah, for more information, don't see the description below because there isn't the link for that. But we had success, and there it was. And we dragged it out. It was a fairly momentous occasion. And the next problem was, how on earth do we move it? We got it out, but what we didn't really have was a decent plan for removing it. And I spent a rather sleepless night that Thursday night, and I certainly know Pete did as well. I don't know about Daniel, but Pete sort of felt a duty of care towards it, because he'd been instrumental of getting it out to the top, and now we have to figure out how on earth we were going to move it. Our original idea to put it on a farm low loader wasn't sufficient, and whilst lying in bed that night, I had the idea, and the little green trailer that you can see there was once property of North Level, and it was residing in our compound, slowly rotting away. It was the low loader, for anyone who is familiar with drainage operations, of a Berkey Spider. Strange machine. I could do a talk on those for several hours, but I won't. But it was in my yard, and I had this thought, oh, maybe that's useful. And I got the tape measure out the next day and measured it and rang Pete, and he was there within 15 minutes. And he went, I think it'll fit. And we had a damn good look. So I instructed my guys to fetch it out of the yard, where it had been sat for the last 6 years. In fact, the same guys who I had told to take the gas torches to it and cut it in half and put it in the scrap bin more than once, their failure to do so was now not such a bad thing. I told one of my guys, take it around the yard. I said, pump the tyres up, make sure it's fit for use. He rings me 10 minutes later. We've got 2 flat tyres. Okay, so I speak to Pete. Is it? He said, I can sort that. He said, with my cranes. He said, I've got a lot of accounts with tyre companies. Turns out they're an obscure size and they're very hard to come by. But some were found. They were brought up in double quick time, and the tyres were fitted late that night. In fact, Pete had the foresight to buy extra tyres, because I think I'm safe in saying this now, but that single axle low loader with those 4 tyres on was probably rated to around 6 ton carrying capacity, and a Buffalo, I believe, is around the 12 ton mark without the mud in it. So we were testing its construction to the limit, but it was a North Level construction, and we certainly knew how to make things back in the day. So on the Saturday morning, we were geared up. Tiers very kindly came back again free of charge on a Saturday. Obviously no lorries crashed that day, so they were free, and they seesawed it onto this trailer. We couldn't lift it wholesale because the wrecker's not a crane. It wasn't really capable of that, but what we did was we lifted the rear end up, chopped it with timber, moved the wrecker, lifted the front end up, and as you can see, chopped that with timber. The low loader, the single axle green low loader you can see there, was then dragged underneath it by the telehandler behind, and the Buffalo was lifted up and sat into place on the trailer. And it's that trailer from which it left sight on. And that was our route to glory, shall we say. It was quite a momentous day. There was a lot of people came out to see it, and a lot of people who didn't believe we'd A, ever find one, and B, ever get it out. And that's the Buffalo going past. I'm sure many of you, I'm sure all of you are aware of Trinity Bridge. But yeah, that was taken by a drone. I think it was Ross Harris, local farmer, took that picture. It's I'm sure you'll agree, quite a good picture. The Buffalo reached its new home, which was Crowland Cranes. Pete was offered the use of his wash bay facilities, and we took it right the way through Crowland, all the way down Peterborough Road. Ironically, probably the route this Buffalo took in entering Crowland 75 years previous. We kind of retraced its steps, not under its own power, obviously, but yeah, it was quite a day, and we got it back into his yard, and I can still remember how hot the tyres smelled. We just made it, I think it was safe to say, but we pulled it into his yard, and it went into his wash bay. And this was the photo taken afterwards, the recovery team, or some of us at least, in the white hoodie there in the centre. That's Daniel. Obviously, he's on the chat. To his left is myself. To the right of him is Pete Izzet in the orange bomber and the blue polo shirt. And next to him is Robert Tier, of Tier's Recovery, the owner and operator of those, who generously, free of charge, towed the buffalo out. Darren Speechley, and Thomas Izzet, who's son of Crowland Cranes man. And then, as I'm informed, that's also on the very far right, Jake Tier, who's Robert Tier's son. So it's quite a family orientated event, shall we say? So yeah, that was the team. We had a little bit of a team photo at the back of it before the wash down started. I could go on even longer about the restoration and preservation, but I will keep it to one slide. And to be fair, that's probably more Daniel's forte. We have been, as an organisation, extremely fortunate with not only local businesses, like I say, Crowland Cranes, Tier's Recovery, everything free of charge, but even national and international companies who have got on board. The top picture there is the Buffalo gearbox, and that is at David Brown up north. Now, it's Huddersfield, but Daniel, I think, always corrects me. But certainly David Brown's. They do gearboxes for the Ministry of Defence, for heavy industry. Certainly North Level use David Brown gearboxes in our pumping stations. And they sent a team to take the gearbox out, took it back to their workshop, and have completely reconditioned the gearbox. I did neglect to put a picture of it completed, but if I don't leave any surprises, you'll never come to our open shows. Bottom pictures, Crowland Cranes paint shop. We've kept the, well, 95% of the paintwork will remain the same, because as we will tell you when you come and see it, because I'm sure you all will, there's a lot of history in its paintwork, its markings, things scratched into it. So we didn't want to lose that. But certainly the cockpit, if we invite people to go in there, needs to be clean. There's the possibility the cockpit with armoured vehicles is nearly always painted white, and it would most likely have been a lead-based paint, so we couldn't rightfully have paying guests, shall we say, getting in there and being exposed to lead paint. We're still ongoing the work. Like I say, I'll leave that for Daniel. If Daniel's going to hang on after my little talk, I'm sure he will go through the finer points of the restoration with you, because we've been working on it on and off over the weekends, haven't we, Daniel? So yeah, it's quite an ongoing project. We have, and we're going to do some name dropping now. We've had some celebrity visitors. The news went global, I think it's safe to say. The day after we got it out, I had messages non-stop through the night from Daniel. I think peak for me was when we got a double-page spread in the Times newspaper. I own 2 copies of it. I went to the newsagents in Crowland. One's gone in a scrapbook, and the other one is sat next to me. The other copy of the Times is in my bookcase, where it will stay, because there is an aerial shot of me digging the buffalo out, and to make a double-page spread in the Times newspaper is fairly so it's something to be had. And I remember going into the newsagents in Crowland and putting two copies of the Times on the counter, and the lady going, "You do know you've got 2, don't you?" I said, yes. She said, "Do you want 2?" I said, "Yes, I'm in it." She went, "You're in it?" And not everyone in Crowland knew what we'd done, but I politely told her to grab a copy off the shelf, and I said, "Have a look and you'll be pleasantly surprised." Just to name drop some of the people who've been to see us. James Holland, who's an author and historian. Bottom picture there, he's the chap in the centre to the right of Daniel. Dan Snow, if you look at the centre picture, the very lofty chap who's slightly out of shot with the top of his head cropped off, that's Dan Snow. Some of you may be familiar with him. His father as well was a sort of historian and newsreader as well. But Dan Snow runs History Hits, the online history channel. He came down, we gave him a tour of the site. Al Murray, historian and TV personality, comedian, he came with James Holland, so that's him to the right hand side in that bottom picture, and he's very entertaining on his trip. But I think one of the shall we say, he may not have been a celebrity to most people, but the old chap in the top picture there was Ernie Coville from Boston, and he was our guest of honour at the open day. We had a bit of an invitation-only open day for those who'd helped, and Ernie was getting on in years. He was well into his 90s, and he was a veteran of the Rhine crossing, and he actually drove buffaloes over the Rhine. He may even have driven ours. It's one of 500 that the British Army took delivery of, but he told us everything we needed to know. His memory may have faded, but once he got in the back of that buffalo, it came flooding back to him, and he had a little bit of an audience there with Daniel and Pete Izzet, and he gave them a crash course on how to drive a buffalo. And sadly, Ernie passed away several months after he came to visit us. But I think I'm right in saying I think he told Daniel that he had a great time, and it brought back a lot of good memories for him. And he's certainly, as far as Buffalo Group's concerned, he was our main celebrity to come and see us. I could give another many-hour presentation on the military history of the buffalo. I've been doing a little bit of research on it on the side for the sake of for the benefit of the organisation, but I will very quickly touch on it and go through it because I've seen the time and I am dragging on. Apologies, but Daniel will be even longer, so trust me. So this is the short version. What we know about the buffalo so far: it was built by the Food Manufacturing Corporation in Florida, in the United States of America. The Food Manufacturing Corporation was actually an agricultural industry. They built drills, plows, and the like. And in the pre-war years, they came up with an amphibious tractor, or an alligator, that was designed to work in the wetlands of the Mississippi Delta, the Florida Everglades. And it had reasonable success in small numbers. And at the outbreak of World War II, the US Marine Corps decided it needed an amphibious tractor, because I may have been calling it a tank all the way through this, but they are in effect an amphibious tractor. And if you call them a tank in front of military historians, you get chastised and told you're wrong, as we were many times in the start of our project. The Food Manufacturing Corporation found themselves massively out of their depth. They had an order placed with them for several thousand, and they spread the production out through other industries. I think there was 2 plants in California, 1 in Florida. The productions from California went into the Pacific Theatre, out to the island hopping campaign against the Japanese, and many of those built in the Florida plant, obviously being on the eastern seaboard, were shipped over to Europe. The Americans used them as well. There were some used, or some LVT2 models used on D-Day. The Americans used them through the Po Valley in Italy, but the British decided that the river crossing campaign in northwest Europe was going to require amphibious tractors. The Neptune amphibious vehicles, which had been used to plug the breach at Erith, were British made and were considered a failure. The LVT4s, the American made ones, were far more successful, so the British ordered 500 of these. I've been unable to trace the exact history of our exact one because it's a little bit of a bitzer, which I'll go into later. But it was possibly delivered into Ostend, and the reason is I had a lovely chap online send me a picture of buffalo number 46. Exactly the same markings, but on the back it's got 46, not 47, which is a bit annoying, but that picture is in Ostend, which is obviously not far from the port, so it's most likely they were brought straight from Florida, straight to Ostend, offloaded on the ships, and then taken to the front line. We know for a fact it was assigned to the 79th Armoured Division. Those who know your World War II history will be familiar with Hobart's Funnies. The 79th Armoured Division was a specialist armoured division that had specialist engineering equipment, specialist armoured vehicles, and they took on the Buffaloes. And in fact, Ernie Coville, who I was just talking about, was actually trained as a lorry driver, and he was picked out and given a crash course in these and assigned to the 79th Armoured Division and was thrown into the front line. The operations it was possibly used on were the Scheldt estuary, which is the entrance into Antwerp. They were also used in the capture of Antwerp. and the Rhine crossing, which was Operation Varsity. We know for a fact it saw action, or certainly parts of it saw action, because the right-hand armour plating is full of bullet holes, 20mm calibre. That is fairly damning evidence. However, the holes through the armour plating aren't followed through onto the sponsoon on the other side. So that armour plating has come from another Buffalo. Has, we believe, the front armour plating, because the arms of service number, which are coloured squares with a numerical numbering, are what regiment they are in effect. Well, on the back we've got 51 and on the front we've got 55. Now in theory they should be the same number. So at some point during its campaigning this has been botched together out of bits of other buffaloes, but what that does, it makes it very, very difficult to trace its lineage, shall we say. We have got its War Department number from the side. I think it's a 6-digit number with a P prefix, which was used on all amphibious vehicles. And I'm hoping one day that I can raid the National Archive and dig up some info on our particular buffalo. Obviously, you'll be pleased to know we're getting near the end now. We are currently in the process of becoming a registered charity. Our long-term goal is to form a museum with the buffalo as its nucleus, a museum of the floods and of local fenland history in general. If we can shoehorn some sort of Crowland museum into it, because the fact Crowland doesn't have its own dedicated museum is a bit of a crime, bearing in mind its history runs deep from nearly 1,000 years ago. And but we will make our first public appearance. I did say at the start of the meeting, but not all of you were there. Our first public appearance officially will be at Open Farm Sunday at Park Farm at Thorney over the weekend, 11th and 12th of June, which I believe is correct, and I'm sure Michael will correct me if that's wrong. And please come down, have a look, come and meet us, meet me, Daniel, the rest of the team. We've got a Buffalo engine. The original one was obviously too corroded, but someone who will remain nameless generously donated an engine which was sourced in America, which is now up and running. It's a Continental R670, which is the same as goes in the Buffalo, and that is rigged up on a trestle with all the ancillary equipment. And all being well, alongside the Buffalo, we will do runs of the engine so people can experience what the Buffalo would have sounded like. You can see, you can hear, you'll get the full experience, except for the shooting. We'll give that a miss. Please follow us. Any of you guys do Twitter or Facebook? We also have a web page, but on Twitter we are at Buffalo LVT. Facebook, Crowland, that's the animal lives in the wood, isn't it? Crowland Buffalo LVT Association, and our web page is crowlandbuffalo.com. That brings us pretty much to the end. I think me and Daniel can certainly take a lot more questions if you like. You're probably fed up with hearing from me. I will shut this down if I can figure that out, and I will hand back the screen to Karen, and then hopefully we can have a nice chit chat, and any questions we will go from there.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Nick, so much for that. Yeah, we'll have a look at doing some questions.
Well, yeah, you probably want to break first, because I hadn't realised quite how long I was.
Yeah, we can probably continue the questions while having a bit of a break, and obviously people are welcome to grab a drink or whatever as well if you wish. And maybe we can sort of tie the two in if people are happy for that. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
Particularly like your picture there, obviously I liked all your pictures, but I particularly like your picture of Ernie, because I met him when I came to that day, and it was lovely to see him, and he so enjoyed that day and being lifted up to have a look inside it and all of those types of things. He was a lovely guy, and like I say, we got in contact with 3-2 Engineer Regiment, who carry the, I didn't put it in the talk, but 79th Armoured Division have a bull's head as their emblem. That emblem's been passed down the lineage and is now 3-2 Engineer Regiment. And I contacted their commanding officer, and he sent half a dozen soldiers
in uniform. They came down from Catterick and were our guests for the day, and they really made quite a fuss of Ernie, obviously being a veteran, and I think he enjoyed their company. It's probably a bit like the old days, a bit like his army days, I think. So yes, very good. Karen, have you got control of the screen or advice?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
That's
we're back on normal, I think.
That's
yeah,
good.
Thank you. So any questions there for either for Nick? I think
Is Daniel still
Oh,
there?
yeah, still got that. Oh, I think we've got Michael as well there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So any questions from anybody there? Or comments?
You've probably heard it all before, but that was phenomenal. That really was. It actually brought a tear to my eye watching it all.
Oh, thank you, Mandy. But yeah, it's I can't take too much credit because, as I freely said, and I told Daniel to his face at the start of the project, I thought he was nuts. And I've said before, I had work planned for the day after we went down there because I thought we'd find sweet nothing and I'd be leaving site. But I'm very thankful. And to be fair, me and Daniel got on so well on the project. He invited me to join the committee. And yeah, the rest is the last year of history, pretty much for me and Daniel alike.
Yeah. What a beautiful find though, and well done, Daniel, for just really going for it. And
yes, yeah,
just as I say, phenomenal, really phenomenal. I wasn't expecting this tonight, to be fair. I thought it was going to be this tiny little tank that was just sitting on the side of a dike.
It's not a tank.
Don't swear. Don't swear.
Sorry.
It's not a tank.
Sorry.
Oh, congratulations. Congratulations.
Anytime.
I appreciate that.
But yeah, I wasn't expecting that at all. So yeah, I'm really pleasantly surprised by that, and I'll be following the site. Thank you.
There's a comment and a question from Stephen on the chat there. Really enjoyable talk and informative about something I knew nothing about. Was there any issues over the potential ownership once you found the 47?
No is the short answer. I don't know if Daniel's there. I got a text saying his battery had died. Daniel had contacted the Ministry of Defence prior to us even starting the dig, and the MOD's general response was, "What tanks?" And he outlined it to them, and they were fairly supportive. They basically said anything that's there has been written off a long time ago, 75 years ago, and they. Well, in written, they gave him permission to have the buffalo, I think the wording was for memorial or monument, because the original plan of the committee was to put the buffalo on a pedestal in Crowland as like a monument to the floods of 1947 and
Yes.
and the efforts put in by the local population, because I think every able-bodied man was taken for sandbag filling. And so, yes, the army said you can have it for monument or memorial, but if you try and sell it, they will seize it or legally take ownership. But no, the army have been, like I say, we contacted 3-2 Engineer Regiment. Their commanding officer, I think he's a major general, phoned me up one day whilst I was at work. I was fairly honoured to speak to him. And he basically said, "What do you want? How many soldiers do you want us to send to your event? What uniform would you like them to wear?" And the army have been supportive. And to get back to the question, ownership is by the committee, will be by the charity, and the army have been supportive of us from day one, really.
Yes.
Good. Very good.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions on there about, are there plans to recover any more of them or the rest of them? And Michael's replied on there, "Oh yes," with an exclamation mark.
Daniel, are you in a position to comment on that one?
Hopefully by the end of the year we could be looking at recovering number one. End of the year or this time next year. We're just trying to get the Buffalo 47 in some sort of shape or form to display it for the public for the 75th anniversary. So we've been quite busy getting that ready. As I said before we started, we had an engine run last night. Michael Sly is in charge of that, and he'll be able to tell you a bit more about that. But the engine came from America, and I don't think it's been used in any form or shape in a vehicle. It's been in storage since 1945, and this is the first time it's actually ran last night for hopefully a destination for the buffalo.
Wow.
I think, if I may, Karen, can I just come in? I think just to expand on Daniel's point there, it was built obviously, and it was a service exchange engine. It had sort of been stored somewhere dry and a bit dusty, but it had never been used apart from being tested at the factory. And the one thing, and I'm only a peripheral part on the edges of this whole great endeavour, but the emotion and passion that this has sort of garnered in the sort of this local, I call in the Fens community, and whether they be people from an engineering background, agricultural background, whatever it is, have wanted to have a little part of it, and it's amazing how somebody knows somebody who knows somebody that can do something, and you suddenly find someone. Well, there's this guy, he's got a couple of engines over in Mississippi in the States. Well, we know somebody who imports stuff from Tennessee across the state border. Yeah, speak to them, and then it happens. Then with Pete, is it finding a brand new set of tracks? Never been used in the Netherlands, if I'm allowed to say that. Daniel will have said it now. The gearbox, the engine, there's a whole load of stuff here that actually within 12 months of this all happening, you would have never have thought it was possible to happen. And actually, I think it's great that that we want to have a charity and that we should have a museum in the future. But the reason it's worked so well is because so many people have come together for nothing, because they all believe in something. They know somebody else, and it's all just been that camaraderie of all putting a little bit in, and it all just then happening. But there's the military side, but we mustn't also forget, as Jill will remember from her youth,
It's amazing.
How different the time was in 1947. The nation was bankrupt. We'd come out of the war. Yes. There was severe rationing, and the government's response at that time, it was a national endeavour here on the Welland, in the North Level and down at Erith. They could not afford to lose any food whatsoever because the nation was so short. They used the Italian and German, they called them European voluntary workers then, who had stayed behind. And they actually mobilised all these people to move potatoes off flooded farms. They then graded them, put them on the railways to get them to the cities because, they were so worried that they thought we could end up in the winter of 47, 48 in famine.
I think it's also important.
Was the buffalo taken by plane for the Rhine crossing?
No, it's too heavy for a crane.
That's what I thought, yes.
Brought in by boat.
I was just wondering, because I remember when the day of the Rhine crossing, when my father woke me in the morning and we looked up and the sky was full of aeroplanes all going equally spaced in one direction with a glider behind them. And he said, you know it before they do.
Yeah.
What's the Rhine is going to, today is the Rhine crossing.
You've got some wonderful memories there.
Yeah.
Because I was, very lively then. Yes.
Yeah.
Jill could tell us a hell of a lot of stories, I think. That'd be really interesting.
I think you're right.
I wish I remembered more, but it was just, it wasn't thinking you remembered, it was how life was.
Yes.
You didn't think about it as different. You took it for granted because this was what it was. What was central heating? Never heard of it. We just put on, it was a different life, but it was definitely hard. Everything was hard, and so on. I mean, even the water. Yes.